Welcome to the Confessions of a Recovering Landlord podcast, where we let you in on the secrets commercial landlords would prefer you not know. Brought to you by our friends at Riata Commercial Realty, Inc. We exclusively represent users of office and warehouse properties. Landlords have representation. Do you? Today's podcast is interesting to me, and let me tell you why. There was a survey done of CEO and business owners and what were the most important things to them in selecting new office space. Can you guess what it was?
I think I can, but let's not give it away too soon.
Oh, okay. What CEOs and business owners care about most when deciding on a location. Go.
Wow. Boy, you know what? I'm the first thing I'm going to answer that with is it depends on who you ask.
That's always, it depends is the key word.
It's always the key word. I don't care what industry you're talking about. It depends is always your best answer. But you know, every CEO has a different perspective, of course, and she may have a greater focus on one thing versus another based on who their customer base is, their employee base, where they are in the country, what industry they're in. There's all kinds of things. But, you know, my answer is going to be what I think I hear most often. And, you know, I'm saying I think I hear because I can, you know, potentially have missed it in a couple of cases. But I would say, in my opinion, the number one thing that I hear from CEOs and clients as to what is most important to them is a space image that is most consistent with the image and values that the company wants to project. And project to whom? Again, that varies. Sometimes it may be, you know, they want to project a certain image to clients or to investors or to employees. And that could even change over time. You know, if they're a startup, they may want to project an image of frugality and to their investors. So their investors are the most important one right then. But then it's, you know, right, they're getting things up and running. They get their software built. Now they're most focused on the image to employees because they're trying to attract those people. Later on, if they have if somebody has a business where it's really important that they look good to the clients, then, you know, that's who they're most focused on.
Well, like take Riata, for example. We have a long bar, sawdust, and peanut shells on the floor with a jukebox in the corner. But that's the image we like to present. And it's not for everybody.
Just in case the dance breaks out.
Which has been man in the corner.
It has been known to happen.
Well, there's one particular story I like that you were just telling the other day about a client who officed with some other people.
Yes.
And they wanted to move. And so tell the concerns. It was a partnership, two friends of ours that had a CPA financial firm. And one felt one way and one felt another. And I thought it was interesting.
So it was actually our very first client when we started Riata. And the client was actually a financial advisory firm, wealth advisory firm, but they shared space with a CPA firm.
Okay.
And so the wealth advisory firm, you know, catered to people with a little cash and who were a little more used to the finer things in life. And they were in a building that was owned by a bank, and the bank was leasing the excess space that they didn't use. So it wasn't the kind of thing where they were trying to maximize the cash flow of the building and maximize the value of the building, this kind of thing. They were just trying to get a little cash flow on space that wasn't in use. So they didn't really pay attention to the building the way an investor owner would. And so they weren't maintaining the building the way they wanted to. And this wealth advisory firm was not comfortable sending their clients to the restrooms because the restrooms weren't being maintained well. So they wanted to move out of the building. The CPA practice that they shared space with, on the other hand, was more concerned about not projecting an image that was too nice for fear clients would say, well, man, they must be overcharging us for our, you know, tax returns because they're in this really, really nice space. And so we moved the wealth advisory firm to a much nicer building where they did maintain the restrooms. And the CPAs are still in the same building today, 18 years later.
And everybody's doing great. But I think the
yeah.
important part of that story is they each knew their clientele and what was important to them. And obviously, they've both grown and done well. And I think that's very important.
And what's interesting to me is that even within the same industry, there is a huge range of opinion on what people should pay, what their image is. I mean, we represent and serve a lot of wealth advisory and financial services firms. And I was in one of those yesterday with a client, and they have really, really nice space in a really nice building. They're up on the 18th floor. They've got all this, glass, and everything's really high end. And their space looks south toward downtown Dallas. It's got a fantastic view of the skyline of Dallas, and they're growing. So we're talking to them about expanding their space, but they said, now I know they have space in this building on the 10th floor, but that's kind of a downgrade. I don't want to go down to the 10th floor. And we've got to have this south view because we want that view of downtown. We don't want to have a view of, going north where it's just not as interesting.
The Costco on Forest Lane.
But we also have wealth advisory clients that are in very inexpensive buildings in a city to be unnamed. And they're paying half of what the previous one is. And, because they don't feel the need for that for whatever reason. Maybe they're at a different, their clients are at a different point in their total wealth. So, if you're worth only $2 million, you're not expecting the same thing as if you have 20 million or $200 million. So it varies quite a lot. But what we've talked a lot about sort of what I'll call the scale of opulence versus frugality. So that's definitely a big issue, but that image can mean other things. I mean, health consciousness, for example, there's this thing called LEEDs, leadership in energy efficiency design. And so there are companies that will only consider a building that is LEEDs gold or LEEDs silver, or whatever, because there's different levels of LEEDs certification, I guess is the way to say it. And so they want their employees to know that they're really conscious, or sometimes even their customers. Another image issue is going to be ease of access. If you're that wealth advisor again, and you're serving an elderly population, or you're a medical, like we had a client one time that was a elder care attorney. So she is focused on serving elderly people and the family members who are helping elderly family members. So having ease of access, being able to get out of their car, walk straight in with a very easy, short walk, making sure that it's accessible for a wheelchair. Those things are incredibly important, because if they were going to make it difficult on their client, what does that say? If they don't have ADA access, that's going to send a message to their client that's not good. We have other clients that do therapy services for children with disabilities, and what's interesting about that is the typical look or typical profile, I should say, of one of their clients is a child with a disability, and the mother is typically the person bringing the child to therapy, and they typically are bringing another child, at least one, with them, either an older child or a younger child. So often there's going to be a stroller involved. There might be a wheelchair involved. So they've been really specific that we will only make our clients go through one door to get into our space.
Right.
We're not going to make them go into a main lobby of a building. That requires one door, and then go into our space, which is a second door. We're not going to make them go up in an elevator.
Well, and there's two reasons for that. Not just ease of access, but a lot of times those children that are being treated need to have a very clean, simple, modified space that doesn't trigger any of the issues they may be dealing with. So it's all that has to be considered.
Yeah, uncomplicated. So anyway, so all of that I'm kind of lumping into space image as the category of what I hear from clients and CEOs.
And number two? I
Well,
like this one because to me, this is also your client. But that's probably because I run and manage a brokerage.
yeah, I mean, you're right. So the second reason CEOs really are focused on or how they make a decision on what space to go to is how to attract and retain employees. And so that's more the case today than it ever has been.
Mm-hmm.
It was true previously before COVID, but since COVID has become even more important because
it's an employee's market.
Well, it's an employee's market, and people are trying to get their employees to come back to the office. And a lot of people say, hey, it's a lot. We're just as productive with people working from home as coming to the office. And that's probably true in some cases. I'm hearing from a lot of people that is not the case. So, again, one size doesn't fit all. So that's true with some, it's not true with others. Even if they have a work from home model, but they want employees to come into the office on a regular basis for just meetings once a week or 2 times a week, whatever, they still want to make sure they have a nice place. And this is really why right now, when you look at the office market, the really high-end Class A buildings are doing really well, because a lot of companies that are shrinking their size because they are implementing a hybrid workforce model are upgrading their space because hey, I'm only going to lease 20% of the amount of space I previously leased. I'm going to pay up for this stuff, make it really nice, so that when people come, employees come to the office, it's a really good experience for them.
Yeah. And number 3?
Well, actually, let me say one other thing.
Didn't finish number 2?
Well, I just had another thought. I'm like Columbo here. So long ago, several years ago, I had several times where a client would say, I want to be in a really high-end Class A building. And my initial response at that point was, oh, you must have a lot of clients that come to the office that you need to impress. And I was surprised when the answer was, we don't have any clients coming to the office. And I was like, well, why would you spend so much money on the building, on the rent? You're going to go spend $40 a square foot on the building when I could show you a really nice building for $20 or $25 a square foot. Why would you do that? And the answer was, that's what I have to attract the kind of employee I want. That was pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. So, this is not just a recent phenomenon, but I do think it's much more so now.
Yeah, more widespread. Okay, number 3 is location.
Yeah, and location is it is interesting because we're talking the whole category of this. The whole topic of our talk today is how does the CEO make a decision on location? So to say location as one of the options seems a little bit crazy, but it's location relative to something else that's important here. So relative to where their clients are located. I want to be close to my clients. I want to be close to my employees. I want to be close to the operations. Like, we have a manufacturing facility, but we need a separate office, but we want that to be close to the operations perhaps. And, a fourth one of these is, where does the CEO live? If he or she lives in a certain spot, CEOs aren't known to want to waste their time in the vehicle on a long commute in many cases. So minimizing the commute from home is a big deal. But the other issue here, and when I said operations, I mean, what about throughout the day? So, let's say you have a business where you have a lot of salespeople coming and going throughout the day, or a lot of service people. Let's say you run a copier repair service and your people are coming and going, their techs are coming and going all day long. So you want to minimize how far they're going to have to drive to get to their clients.
Well, one that you're working on right now that I think is, it warms my heart is a institute that takes care of people that have brain injuries and they can be handicapped. They can look totally fine, just like you and I do, and yet they have some cognitive issues. But why are you laughing?
Because I'm glad to hear that you think I look totally fine.
I said you or I. But one of their primary considerations is they have to be near public transport.
Yeah.
And I love that because a lot of their people can't drive and they have to come in through some kind of rail system. And so they don't want their location further than a block from reliable, big, major transport system. And I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's neat.
It's interesting because we looked at a space not too long ago that was like on a road where there was a bus stop. So there's a bus stop right in front of the development, and they would have been in the second building in the development closest to that bus stop. So everything cool, everything's good, right? Well, then something happened. The landlord had some change of heart or something, and it doesn't look like they were going to be able to go in that space. But the landlord had another space within the same development, but it was 3 buildings away. So now all of a sudden you're in the same development. Bus stop hasn't moved, but where you are relative to that bus stop has now gone from 500 yards to, half a mile almost, a third, I think 3/10 of a mile. And it was just like, if we have one of our clients coming here by bus and they have difficulty walking or they're in a wheelchair, that's just too far. And especially in July and August when it's over 100 degrees, I don't want them having to do that. So yeah, the location is pretty interesting. One of the things we recommend that clients do is that they give us the addresses of whatever their constituency that they're trying to stay within proximity of. So if that's all their employees, if that's all their clients, if that's whatever.
Vendors that come and go.
Yeah, whatever it is, give us all those because, and I've told this story before, but we had a client, somebody we knew very, very well, and he was desperately wanting to get closer to the house with the office, but he was so worried about the image, what it would look like to be moving closer to the CEO's office, home. And I kept asking for those employee addresses and he kept delaying. But when he finally gave them to me, I handed it to him and just was laughing at him because his house was immediately in the perfect dead center of the scatter of where all of his employees lived. And I said, you would be doing your employees a favor if you'd move your office to your house. And
how's that for a commute?
it didn't happen for other reasons. He ended up merging his company into a larger company, et cetera. But it was pretty funny. Another example of this was we had a tenant that was back when I was a landlord that was trying to lease in one of our buildings, but we were competing with another building. And it turned out that they did a lot of daily in and out. And that they made the mistake of telling us being the landlord at the time, that if they were to move to the other building, they would have to hire an extra employee to cover all the work because of the amount of time it took to get from the parking space up to their suite and back. And our building did not have that problem. So we knew that as long as our proposal was less than the annual salary and benefits of one extra person, we had the deal. And we did get that deal. And so, yeah, location, everybody says location, but it's location relative to something.
Right. What's the deciding factor?
Yeah.
Okay. And number 4 is encourage and support productivity. Back to my hardwood floors, sawdust, and peanut shells. But that's just us.
I don't know that that's going to be the productive part. It may be the motivational part and the encouragement part. Productivity. This is really important because when you choose and when we say choose a location, we're not just saying this, the where you put the dot on the map. We're talking about how do you choose which property you go to. And so encouraging the right productivity is important. Like in that last example I just gave you, the productivity was an issue because for the number of people, I think they had 10 people that were coming and going all day, running all their service calls. So they were being very productive, but our building was more productive because they could do that with 10 people. The other building was going to require 11 people. And so that building was less productive for them, less efficient, because they weren't going to be able to do it as cost effectively and with as fewer resources. So a lot of times this is a big issue, especially when it comes to industrial properties. So for example, whenever we're dealing with an industrial client, we always ask a bunch of questions. How much power do you need? How many, dock doors do you need? Do those dock doors need to be dock high or grade level, meaning street level? What kind of clear height do you need? Do you need
Kind of
three-phase
parking, overnight parking
parking?
will you need?
Yeah, I mean, how many trucks can you park? Do you need a fenced yard? I mean, just the number of issues goes on and on and on. And we actually had a client one time that said, I must have dock high. I'm sorry, I have to have grade level space with an overhead door because I'm sorry, I'm screwing this up terribly. They had to have dock high.
Take two.
They had to have dock high because if they didn't have dock high, then they had to have all their deliveries with a truck that has a Tommy lift, that thing that goes up and down at the back. And that cost them an extra $150 per delivery from whoever delivered to them.
Oh, wow.
So they on average got 10 deliveries a week. So if they did not have a dock high, that was going to cost them an extra $1,500 a week or $6,000 a month. And so they were able to pay up on the rent for a dock high space and still save money because of that. Same thing with the clear height. Depending on how the operations of the company works, let's just say they're a warehousing operation where they bring in product and they break it down and then repackage it or, send it out in smaller lots to their clients, their customers. Well, if you can stack stuff, the higher you can stack stuff, the more efficiency you get. So if you have a 24-foot clear space and you want to stack 5-foot pallets 4 high, well, 5 foot times 4 is 20, plus you have to have room in between. Well, 24 is not a high enough space because you also have to leave 18 inches from the top
for the fire code
to the ceiling. And so instead of a 24-foot space, now you're going to have a 26 or 28-foot space. Well, what if you go all the way to 30 and now you can stack it 5 high? Well, the increase in productivity by having that much more cubic space to manage your products is going to be greater than the incremental cost of leasing a 30-foot space versus a 24 or 26 or 28-foot space. So that's what we talk about, why we talk about productivity. It's real estate, I tell clients all the time, is a necessary evil. Evil is too strong a word, but what I mean by that, it's a necessary cost to the business. And yet you want to make sure it's done, that you minimize the cost of it to maximize your profit. And so productivity is a really, really major factor in that.
Okay, number 5, consistent with value proposition of the company. I think you've kind of already addressed this one in number 1 when you were talking about how one person wanted to have very nice amenities for their clientele to come and feel comfortable there. And the other person was like, oh no, I don't want them to think I'm blowing all their money and making too much. So yeah, I think that's part of it.
This one is definitely very similar to that first one. I agree with you. The only thing I would say here is that, you want to make sure that your value proposition that you give to your clients or your employees or whatever is similar. And so, for example, I would say in the case of a company that is trying to be green and try to be really environmentally conscious, let's say Greenpeace itself is looking for space. Well, if Greenpeace went into a building that was not LEEDs certified, that would look very inconsistent with the value proposition. It could also be that, if you're well, I mean, look at this in retail. We don't do retail, but if you're a high-end fashion designer and you're in a shopping center with a Kroger or even worse, an Aldi,
right,
that's not consistent. That needs to be in a real high-end lifestyle center with a lot of other similar type of tenants. So it's, same thing. I mean, like if it's a bank, I mean, you look at old timey banks, they always had those giant columns outside, right? Why did they need those giant columns? Well, they didn't, but it reinforced the idea of we're stable. Stability. Yeah, we're stable, we're strong, we're never moving, we're never, we're always going to be here. And that's consistent with their value proposition. So trust me, I'll be around when you need your money.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with you. It's similar, but it's a little bit of a nuance as well. So that's why I made that as a separate item.
Number 6 is civic responsibility. You're going to flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is not one that you hear probably as frequently, but civic responsibility is, again, it kind of goes back to, your value proposition or your image. Again, it's kind of related to some of the other things. I mean, I could actually argue that all of these things are really similar to each other. But when I say civic responsibility, there are times when companies want to be in a certain area because of something that's not immediately obvious. We had a client once that wanted to be in an opportunity zone, a hub zone, hub being historically underutilized business zone, and he wanted to be in a specific Texas congressperson's district. Mm-hmm. And so we had to overlay all three of those things onto each other to try and figure out where we could put this person, this office for this person. And it was interesting because close to downtown and uptown, there's a street called Maple. So you could be on the west side of Maple and check all three of those boxes, but we could not be on the east side of Maple because we only checked 2 of the 3 boxes. So there were political reasons, civic reasons why this person needed to be so specifically in all of those people's or, to check all those boxes, I should say. Maybe the congressperson had been instrumental in the funding of this organization, because this was a nonprofit organization, I should have mentioned. Because of who they serve, they need to be consistent and be in an opportunity zone. Sometimes you want to be in an opportunity zone or a hub zone because of the benefits that inures to the company. We had a client once that was a airplane parts distributor. So if you needed the backs of seats for a 707 jetliner, you'd go to these people and say, I need 500 of those things. And they'd go find them for you and deliver them to you. Well, it was not only a women-owned business, but it was a Native American-owned business and a hub certified business. So they needed to be in a building that was, again, checking all those boxes. And they got certain tax benefits as a result of doing that. And they also got the ability to do business with governmental agencies and companies that did business with governmental agencies, like the defense contractors, that they wouldn't have been able to do if it weren't for all those things. So, is that civic responsibility or is that civic opportunity? It's kind of both, right? But all those things kind of come into play. But, here we're very active in our town of Plano, which is a suburb north of Dallas with about 300,000 people. And, I served on the Planning and Zoning Commission and for 5 years. And so we got to know a lot of people that are involved in the city government and other things. And several of our clients have said, I will not ever lease or own property outside of Plano. Mm-hmm. We've also had clients that have said, the next town north of us is Allen. I'll never have my business outside of Allen. Right. So
very loyal.
Yeah, they're very loyal because, hey, that's where I'm really active. And my kids go to those schools. I'm involved in, whatever.
I want to support them.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. And I think it's kind of a cool thing because you become part of a community and you're a business owner in that community. And you live in that community.
And you're in the Chamber of Commerce. And I want to touch back on a point you said about we had to overlay these 3 different things to find the place you needed. Just a shout out for using a tenant rep. You might go, space to space calling on your own, but the tools we have at our disposal are incredible. And for you to be able to get everything he wanted in one search is amazing. And that's very difficult to do on your own. So again,
Well,
that's why it's best to use a tenant rep broker.
I think you're right. And what's interesting about that is that if you did just start calling on the signs in front of buildings saying, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Are you this? Are you that? Are you the other? Whoever you're talking to in that situation is trying to sell you on coming to the building.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to you.
They do have one to the landlord.
To the landlord, yeah, but not to you, the prospective tenant. Whereas our fiduciary is strictly to the tenant, and we don't have any loyalty to any one building or any 100 buildings. And it's not unusual when we start a search for a client that when we search the area, just to kind of see how many buildings are there could easily be 100, 200 buildings in the same area, maybe even more, that could potentially fulfill the needs of that client. So our job is to kind of filter through all those things to try and figure out the ones that really fit, not try to sell a tenant on one individual or group of buildings.
I agree. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
As always, we'd like to give a shout out to our friends at Riata Commercial Realty, Inc., where they only represent tenants, which is what our podcast is all about.
We only represent users. Most of whom are tenants. Some of them are owners because they buy instead of lease, but that's all right. But users, and tenant rep is kind of the shorthand, but corporate real estate advisors is sort of a better term. And for us, Riata is an acronym that stands for Real Estate Advisors and Tenant Advocates. So that's kind of what we talk about and do every day.
You can find us at TexasTenantRep.com or call us at 972-677-0028. Thank you for your time and rapt attention.
See you next time.
Bye.